Not too big, not too small.
Pulling this loin off, I think what I'm gonna do. I cannot wait to get into that. Ham off domestic pork, but still that good white meat. What I'm gonna do, put some vegetables with it, this guy in foil, and just lay that. That's good pork loin, man. Oh, it's good.
Steven is a hunter and a food lover. In search of legendary cuisine, he travels far and wide, entering various dangerous places to gather fresh ingredients for his dishes. He recently arrived at the Alaska Peninsula to chase a legendary goat living at the ice-capped summit. These goats, rarely having any predators, have tender and delicious meat, attracting gourmet hunters willing to risk it all. In Alaska, non-residents can hunt goats only if they are licensed outfitters or direct relatives of local residents. Steven meets neither criterion, but luckily his brother Danny qualifies. They set off together, parking at the mountain base, and then heading into the mountains fully equipped. Due to Danny's busy schedule, they had only 2 days, so they would return on time regardless of the hunt's outcome. The steep mountain was covered in thick bushes. To save time, they planned their route uphill. While using binoculars, they unexpectedly spotted a goat at mid-altitude, a rare sight at such a low elevation. Steven used a more precise binocular to try to determine the goat's gender, aiming for a male. Unfortunately, the distance made it hard to discern. Deciding to get closer, they were cautious, knowing the treacherous path had claimed hunters annually. They overcame numerous obstacles and reached the base of the peak, but the real challenge began with moss-covered rocks making the ascent slippery. They leaned forward, slowed their pace, and carefully climbed to a safe area. Upon spotting the goat again, they realized it was a female, which had already noticed them and moved higher up. Their path was now covered with snow, slowing them down significantly. Looking up, they saw the goat at the summit, at least an hour away by their pace. After resting briefly, they continued climbing but saw no more goats in the next few hours as the sun set. They decided to camp outdoors and resume the hunt the next morning. Avoiding deep snowy areas, they walked through dense vegetation. After miles, they finally spotted a goat on a dangerous cliff. Using binoculars, they observed 4 goats, including a male. Reaching them required crossing 2 deep ravines. After planning, they moved, constantly checking the goats, which remained but seemed aware and tense. Preferring not to shoot without certainty and risk losing the goat over a cliff, they held their position, trying to ease the goat's suspicions. After a fruitless wait and no chance to get closer, they decided to circle around and approach from another direction. Reaching a new vantage point, they conducted a thorough search and spotted the goats again. Now sure of their target, they prepared to proceed lightly. After rearranging their equipment, the two resolutely headed up the mountain. Although aware of the difficulty of climbing snow-capped mountains, they only fully realized the challenge once they faced it. They soon became breathless from the climb, but the good news was they were close to the goats, which were still unaware of the danger. They saw a great opportunity to succeed. Steven was about to shoot when Danny urgently stopped him. He noticed something odd about the male goat. Although robust, its horns seemed too thin, more like those of a female. After closely observing and drawing on his years of hunting experience, Steven had to accept that they were all females. Disappointed by this realization, the two felt like crying after all their efforts led to this outcome. The goats, standing at the highest point, seemed to silently mock them. Steven wanted to shoot one in frustration, but wisdom told him to restrain himself. They had no choice but to pack up their equipment and start the return journey. Sometimes hunting is like this, not always smooth, but that's part of its allure. You never know the outcome until the last moment. Later, Steven traveled to southeastern Montana, home to mule deer 3 times the size of regular deer but with tastier meat. Having lived in Montana for 10 years, Steven knew exactly where to find this game. This time, he wasn't alone, but teamed up with his brother Matt and friend Mosum. Matt had prepared a transport team of llamas, as the rugged mountain paths were impassable by vehicle and only llamas could carry the supplies. After a successful hunt, they would also transport the deer meat. After walking several miles, it got dark, and they camped overnight, spending a memorable night. The next morning, before dawn, they got up early and each chose a direction to start their hunting journey, leaving the llamas at the camp. Steven planned to walk along the ridge line, hoping to encounter deer. After searching, he noticed deer tracks everywhere in the snow and identified a mule deer trail, which he followed. Reaching a high point, he used his binoculars for a better view and luckily spotted 2 mule deer. Steven controlled his excitement and set up his rifle. However, a doe was right in front of the buck, preventing him from shooting for fear of hitting her. Soon, as the doe walked away, Steven prepared to shoot, but the buck followed her, causing him to miss his chance again. Cursing under his breath, he continued to look for another opportunity. Suddenly, a magpie landed on the buck's back, creating a surreal and comical scene. More interestingly, a coyote appeared in the distance, also eyeing the mule deer. The alert buck sensed the unusual atmosphere, and all 3 forces unexpectedly converged, causing a sigh of amazement. The balance was quickly disrupted when the doe lost her composure and fled the scene. As Steven felt deflated and chilled from waiting in the snow for 20 minutes, his chance was ruined by the coyote. At that moment, he felt unprecedented anger, but with no other choice, he continued searching for his target. As luck would have it, Steven spotted 3 mule deer again. Just as he was about to act, a cold wind blew, and the buck disappeared. Steven guessed it might still be on the other side of the ridge. He decided to go around the side, hoping to catch it off guard. Despite the obstacles, he reached his destination and used his binoculars to spot the deer below. Steven approached slowly and found a good position, only to see 2 does. The buck was nowhere to be found. While moving and searching, his efforts paid off, and he spotted the buck again. However, perhaps his movements were too loud, and he scared the buck away, leaving only falling snowflakes where it had been. Frustrated by his wasted effort, and with darkness setting in, he had no chance to hunt again and had to return to camp. The next day, the weather worsened with falling snow and reduced visibility. Not ideal for hunting. However, embracing the challenge, Steven set out to find deer. Despite the difficulties posed by the heavy snow, it helped distinguish the freshness of tracks. Steven found some recent messy tracks and followed them to find several deer. He was downwind and in fog, allowing him to approach boldly. Getting closer, he slowly raised his rifle. The buck was unaware of the danger. Quickly, Steven took his shot. With the sound of the gun, the buck fell, stunning the nearby does. After calming his excitement, he returned to camp, brought a llama, and hurried to transport the deer before it froze. After a delay, the deer was covered in thick snow. Steven swiftly butchered the deer, removing the tarsal gland to avoid tainting the meat with its strange odor. Then, he sawed the bones and cut a tender piece from the loin, the most delicious part, perfect for immediate consumption. He then packed the meat and led the llama back, feeling exceptionally content, not just from the successful hunt, but also from the thrill of victory. Next, he eagerly anticipated cooking. He sliced the meat, melted snow in a pot for stewing, and prepared various vegetables by peeling and adding them to the pot with some spices, slowly stewing them into a rich soup. After some time, Matt also returned with a full load, drawn by the smell of the stew and eager to eat. As night fell, they gathered around the fire for a culinary feast. They celebrated the hunt with a stew made from the deer's loin, potatoes, carrots, and other vegetables, using snow for water, enjoying a delicious meal together. Steven came to southwestern Wisconsin, home to cottontail rabbits known for their tender and delicious meat. He also aimed to hunt deer and squirrels, planning to create a mixed meat feast. Steven visited a friend's farm, where generations have lived and managed the surrounding woodlands. Under careful management, the white-tailed deer population had grown, but they needed to be controlled each spring to prevent overpopulation. Steven was invited to join this effort. As preparations were made, 5 hunters entered the woods to drive the deer towards the waiting area, where Doug and Steven positioned themselves. Soon, a large group of deer burst out. Steven tried to shoot, but the deer were too fast and he missed his chance. All hopes were now on Doug. Suddenly, a group of deer dashed out, and Doug, caught off guard, was fortunate as 4 deer stopped briefly. After aiming, he fired. The shot scared the deer off, but Doug was confident he had hit one. He approached the spot and confirmed the kill to the others. They found the buck and decided to process it on the spot, quickly gutting and removing the innards before dragging it back, completing the first phase of their hunt. Next, they targeted cottontail rabbits, which became more active as the temperature rose. Switching to appropriate firearms and ammunition, they ventured into the wilderness where rabbit tracks littered the bushes. They decided to drive the rabbits out, a method that proved effective when Doug quickly spotted a rabbit. Unfortunately, he missed, amusing the group as they laughed at the spectacle. The hunting continued with continuous gunfire as everyone showcased their shooting skills. Steven stood out, nearly achieving a perfect shot rate, and they bagged 8 rabbits. The second phase was now complete, and they cleaned the rabbits by skinning and chopping the meat for storage. Steven, eager to try more game, set his sights on squirrels. Armed, he and Doug headed to a small woodland. Steven mimicked squirrel calls, hoping to lure them. After a wait saw only cows pass by, they moved deeper and waited under a tree. Soon, a squirrel, attracted by the call, approached. Doug aimed and shot it down, earning praise from Steven as they collected their first squirrel of the day. Their luck continued as another squirrel appeared. Doug fired twice, successfully taking it down. With 2 squirrels, they had enough to meet their needs and returned home with their bounty. Steven processed the squirrel and then began to prepare his dish. First, he marinated the ingredients. He poured equal parts apple cider vinegar and water into a bucket, adding some spices, salt, and chopped onions. After stirring everything until well mixed, he placed the rabbit and squirrel meat in the mixture to marinate overnight. The next day, as the sun rose, Steven got busy. The meat was flavorful after marinating overnight. He first patted the meat dry, then coated it with flour and placed it in a hot frying pan. When he flipped it, he found it had turned golden brown, looking and smelling delicious. Steven enjoyed the cooking process immensely. After frying all the meat, he added some broth and finished with a high heat to thicken the sauce, enhancing the flavor. To cut through the richness, he prepared some onions. As the broth was nearly ready, he thickened it by crushing ginger snap cookies into crumbs and stirring them into the pot. At this point, the first dish was ready to serve. Next, he started on the second dish. Steven and Doug went to the barn where a deer was hanging. They quickly butchered it, and Steven picked several tender pieces from the hind legs, which he marinated with spices. He then took the meat outside to grill on a rack. While Steven was busy, others sat on the couch chatting and waiting. Their patience paid off with a delicious dinner arriving in stages. They eagerly tasted it, finding the flavor incredibly satisfying, a new and thrilling experience for them. The group exclaimed with delight and joyously devoured their meal together. This time, Steven came to southeastern Montana with his brother Matt, ready to hunt turkeys. During this season, turkeys are considered one of the most delicious foods. The two, leading their llamas, ventured into the wilderness, their laughter indicating their good spirits. However, the weather soon turned as snow began to fall, potentially impacting their hunting plans. They set up camp in an open area and split up to scout different directions with only an hour of daylight left. Their goal was not just to hunt, but to look for signs of turkey activity. They didn't see any turkeys, but stumbled upon several elks, which amused Steven, as he often couldn't find them when he actually wanted to hunt them. After voicing his frustration, he continued searching and suddenly stopped, hearing the sound of voracious eating. He cautiously approached the source of the noise, and upon entering a small grove he became extra careful, sensing he was near turkey activity. Hiding behind a stump, Steven used a call tool to mimic turkey sounds. Soon, a real turkey responded from the bushes. As he was about to raise his shotgun, a turkey head popped out, startling him. However, Steven remained calm and waited for the right moment. When the turkey moved into an open view, he decisively shot it. The turkey flapped a few times before dying, giving Steven a rush of exhilaration, as the hunt turned out to be unexpectedly smooth. Approaching the turkey, he admired its beautiful plumage, indicating it was a mature male. He couldn't help but admire his catch again before he headed back to camp, walking triumphantly like a victorious general. Back at camp, Matt shared his own experience. He had hidden in the bushes, mimicking turkey calls, which surprisingly attracted a coyote. They stared at each other, unsure of what to do next, until the coyote finally scampered off, cursing. Matt's story amused Steven, adding humor to their adventure. Next, they prepared dinner. Steven cut open the turkey, removed its gizzard, peeled off the tough skin, and prepared the edible parts. He then cut various organs, placed them together, added water to a pot, and began to simmer them on low heat. After 15 minutes, the organs were cooked, and Steven added some chili peppers for flavor. The two tasted it, enjoying the freshness. After their meal, they planned the next day's activities, deciding to hunt in different directions again. As night fell, they slept soundly. The next morning, they set out early. Steven returned to the previous day's spot, while Matt, following his intuition, headed south. Finding a high spot, Matt settled in and mimicked turkey calls while staying highly alert to distant sounds. His patience paid off as a turkey strutted over, emitting mating calls. Understanding the situation, Matt greeted it with a shot, and the turkey died on its mating journey. He approached, played with its feathers, removed the innards, and hid them under a tree before continuing his hunt. Meanwhile, Steven also spotted 2 turkeys. He lay down to avoid detection, knowing that the best way to hunt turkeys, given their poor vision but sharp hearing, is to let them come closer, increasing the chances of a successful hunt. Under his strategy, 2 turkeys were moving in his direction. Steven silently raised his gun, and just as the turkeys stopped, the gunshot shattered the silence. The tom turkey fell dead, and Steven slowly exhaled, feeling a pang of pity as he watched the hen run away. After she was out of sight, he approached, picked up the heavy turkey, and plucked the feathers from its belly. He made an incision, removed the innards into a bag, and then tied the turkey to his backpack to start the journey back. Returning to camp, he hung the turkey alongside the one from the previous day. After some time, Matt returned with 2 more turkeys, and both were thrilled with their successful hunt. They got straight to work, plucking the feathers from the turkeys. Afterward, Steven started a fire, anticipating the next part of their feast. He cut the fatty rear off the turkey, wrapped it in foil, and gently pounded it with a stone to tenderize the meat. He then seasoned it with chili powder, coated it with breadcrumbs, and fried it in oil until it was golden brown and crispy. Steven then cut a lemon into slices and arranged them, placing the fried turkey on top to infuse it with the citrus flavor. Dinner was ready, and they eagerly tasted it. The turkey was crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, and carried a refreshing hint of lemon. They enjoyed the meal immensely, finding themselves deeply indulged in the culinary delight. The turkey hunt had ended perfectly. Months later, Steven arrived in southeastern Arizona to pursue the king of the mountain, the mountain lion. He teamed up with 2 experienced lion hunters, Green and Mitchell, who had trained a pack of loyal and fierce hounds. For nearly 30 years, these 2 had been a nightmare for mountain lions. A large ranch in the area suffered yearly attacks from over a dozen lions, making it their job to protect the livestock. Despite their efforts, the ranch still lost about 50 cattle last year. Since Steven knew little about mountain lions, Green gave him a crash course, such as how to distinguish between dog and lion tracks. The lion's paw is wider, and the toes differ. After the lesson, they began looking for more signs. They soon spotted a clear footprint, which Green determined was made a day or 2 before. Nearby, they found a deer carcass, devoured except for the head, a grim reminder of the predator they were dealing with. Excited about the next day's hunt, Steven barely slept. At dawn, the hounds were ready to track the mountain lion and corner it against rocks or trees for the hunters to shoot with pistols, chosen for their portability and stopping power. The hunt began, and the dogs picked up the scent. The hunters followed slowly as signs of the lion's presence increased. The dogs, with their sensitive noses, could detect faint odors left on rocks. As more dogs began to bark, indicating frequent lion activity in the area, they faced a challenging task of discerning fresh tracks from the day before to determine the lion's escape route. This process could take from half an hour to half a day, requiring the lion hunters to be very patient. Fortunately, their luck held as the hounds formed a line and sprinted off, having secured a direction. Led by the lead dog, they chased after the lion's location. However, the good times didn't last. After climbing to a rocky peak, the dogs became confused. Realizing they shouldn't waste more time there, the hunters led the hounds deeper into the territory. After an afternoon of searching without any sightings, they reluctantly gave up the hunt. That night, Steven felt incredibly disappointed, lying in bed unable to sleep for a long time. Time flies, and 3 months later, Steven returned to the same location, ready to continue his previous challenge. He teamed up again with the 2 lion hunters, bringing along their most elite pack of hounds, each skilled in combat. After some searching, they spotted a set of fresh tracks, indicating an active mountain lion in the area, which greatly boosted their morale. The hunting dogs, particularly excited, sniffed ahead, but as time passed, they still had not found anything. Steven's spirits sank, worried about repeating past failures. However, Green soon shared some good news. The hound team had cornered a mountain lion. When Steven arrived, he realized it was a misunderstanding. The youngest hound had mistaken a young bear for a lion, which was somewhat amusing. They continued their search for a mountain lion in the volcanic terrain, where higher temperatures made scent tracking a challenge. When they reached a rocky summit, the dogs started barking again, indicating that a lion had spent the night there, but now the trail seemed to vanish. Steven, observing the challenging terrain they had traversed, felt the difficulty of the lion hunters' task. Despite their efforts, they hadn't even seen a lion, making it a tough hunt. With daylight dwindling, they reluctantly ended their day's journey. Although dissatisfied with the outcome, Steven appreciated the resilience shown, which was the greatest takeaway from this experience, along with a bit of self-consolation. After some rest, Steven traveled to the southern border of the United States, prepared to hunt American bison, a creature weighing over 1,000 pounds and the largest mammal in North America. Even wolves hesitate to provoke them. Here in the vast Sonoran Desert, characterized by sparse vegetation, cattle ranching thrived. The local ranch competed with the roaming bison herds, tolerating their presence but ensuring they remained within manageable limits. Today, Steven was permitted to hunt an adult bison, but unfamiliar with the terrain, he had to search blindly for signs of them. Currently, North America hosts about 500,000 bison, 94% of which live on or are owned by private lands. In this area, about 100 bison descended from 10 cows, and 1 bull released 35 years ago, roaming tens of thousands of acres. As Steven moved, he used his binoculars to scan the area. As the day grew hotter, he felt on the verge of dehydration. Jokingly, he thought he'd rather chase bison in swimwear due to the extreme heat, which seemed only suitable for birds patrolling the skies. Despite his complaints, his persistence paid off, and he finally spotted the bison. To avoid startling them, he immediately crouched down and set up a high-powered telescope for a closer look. The bison were now visible in more detail, but Steven still didn't make a move. Given the intense heat, the internal organs could expand before skinning, affecting the meat's quality. The wise approach was to watch the animals until the evening when the weather cooled. As the minutes and seconds painfully dragged on, Steven endured the heat while keeping his eyes fixed on the bison, afraid they might escape. Under this arduous and painful wait, 4 p.m. finally arrived, and it was time to act. He readied his weapon and selected a target, waiting for the bison to stand up to clearly distinguish one. Steven judged that when the shadows covered the herd, they would stand up and start feeding. After a short wait, his prediction proved correct. He put away his binoculars and took out his rifle, silently aiming. Soon he spotted a target, and without its knowledge, pulled the trigger. The bison fell instantly while the gunshot scared the others, causing them to scatter. Steven took a deep breath, calmed his excitement, and continued observing. These bison were aggressive and wild. A charge from them could trample one into mush. After waiting until the herd moved away from the site, Steven cautiously approached. The bison was a young female, much smaller than a bull but with tenderer meat that tasted better. This meat would be enough to fill his freezer. First, he cut the cow's neck to drain the blood. After a wait, he began his work, taking out a small knife to slowly peel off the hide from the ankles. After this step, he dismembered the limbs and hung the legs on a nearby tree. The meat was of excellent quality, lean and satisfying. Steven sped up, hanging each leg on the tree to cool them quickly, ensuring the meat's deliciousness. He then cut the loin and hump, his favorite parts. As the sun set, 3 hours since the hunt began, Steven still had much work left due to the bison's large size. The physical effort was draining, but he dared not stop for rest, as wild animals could be attracted by the smell of blood. After more busy work, he finally finished butchering the bison and was famished. He started a fire, cut a small piece of liver, and grilled it on the coals, turning it once. Soon, the liver was cooked, and Steven enjoyed its raw taste. After eating, he took out his sleeping bag and immediately fell asleep. The next day, refreshed, Steven woke up and prepared to transport the meat down the mountain. Since he couldn't do it alone, he called for help. The ranch owner brought some horses. They took the meat down, packed it into bags, and during this time, Steven cut the bison's tongue to use for a dish, and they split the head, a valuable resource. They packed everything and began their return journey. Back at the ranch, the owner showed Steven how to preserve the meat. They carefully sliced it thin, salted it, and let it dry in the sun for 2 to 3 days. The dry local climate was perfect for this process. They hung the meat high up, mainly to keep it away from dogs. Over time, the meat turned into jerky, which could be pounded into powder and mixed with water to make a tasty snack. After the hard work, it was time to relax with a dinner featuring grilled meat. They made many cuts in the beef, set up a grill, and slow roasted it over charcoal. Meanwhile, the farm's chef prepared a type of flatbread with bison tongue filling. Another favorite dish of Steven's was beef heart corn cakes, made by frying the heart with tomatoes, onions, and peppers, and eating it wrapped in cornbread. After their careful preparation, a rich dinner was ready. They gathered to enjoy the feast, everyone relishing the meal. It was a joyful evening. This time, he came to the South Island mountain ranges of New Zealand, prepared to hunt the elusive red deer. The South Island's mountains, characterized by glaciers, highlands, and rolling grasslands, are home to numerous wild animals. Among them, red deer, an introduced species from 19th century Europe, have proliferated due to the lack of natural predators. Thus, hunters are needed to control their numbers. Mathieu invited a local friend, Rémi, a guide who explained the area's terrain to Steven, and then drove him into the mountains. Along the way, Rémi mentioned another wild animal, the sheep, known for its equally delicious meat. The two planned to first hunt a lamb for food over the next few days. Reaching the high mountains, they saw a river in the valley with a few sheep nearby. Steven aimed to hit a lamb in the head, using his friend as a support. After aiming briefly, he shot at a brown lamb. They approached to check and found a well-sized lamb hit in the shoulder. They moved to an open area to gut it, removing the innards and tying it to the front of the car before deciding to continue up the mountain. It took some effort, but they finally reached the summit and unloaded their gear. His friend said goodbye and started back. With a few hours until dark, Steven quickly set up his tent, then skinned and packed the lamb meat to protect it from flies. Afterward, he went out to scout the area. As an outsider, he knew nothing about the place and needed more observation to plan properly for the next day. Night fell quickly, and though he saw nothing, he gained some understanding of the terrain. The next day, a thick fog suddenly reduced visibility. Steven went to the highest point of the mountain to wait for the weather to improve. Unfortunately, the fog only thickened over hours, forcing him to change his plans and wander around after descending in search of game. After some time, Steven heard some noises ahead but couldn't identify them. He approached slowly, but his footsteps startled whatever was there, causing it to run away. Frustrated but understanding that it was not a good day for hunting, he returned to camp to eat the lamb. He tied a leg to a tree and roasted it over an open fire. As the heat increased, the dripping fat looked delicious. Once the leg's surface was charred, he stopped, tore off a piece, sprinkled it with chili powder, and began to savor it. The lamb was incredibly tender, almost melting in his mouth. Steven marveled, considering it one of the best meats he had ever eaten. The next day, as the fog finally cleared, Steven admired the scenery while starting his quest for red deer. He traversed various terrains and continuously used his binoculars. Over the next few hours, he saw several deer, but no red deer. It wasn't until midday that he spotted a young male red deer. Energized, Steven planned his approach to get closer to the target. However, halfway there, he encountered a problem. The ridge's peak was crowded with deer watching him intently. A direct approach would easily startle them, alerting the red deer to the danger. Steven decided to observe their reactions, which unfortunately seemed agitated, with some deer even making warning sounds. At this point, he had no choice but to back off and take a completely different, longer route which would take hours, but it was his only option. Before starting, he filled a bottle with water from a stream and began the long, tiresome journey. Fortunately, Steven's luck was good today. By the time he arrived at the spot, the deer was still there, resting. He carefully observed and waited patiently for an opportunity while adjusting his rifle. As he hoped, the deer eventually stood up. Steven slowly raised his gun, and seeing the deer lift its head, he decisively fired. However, the shot seemed to miss. Startled, the deer bounced a few times, then stopped. Just as Steven was about to fire again, a scene unfolded that took him by surprise. A huge deer emerged from the bushes, capturing Steven's attention. He wanted to hunt this larger deer, but having already fired once, he needed to ensure the first deer would fall. While he waited, the surviving deer ran off to a farther place. Reluctantly, Steven watched them leave. He then went to check on the first deer and found it already down. Looking at its large antlers, Steven was impressed by the size of the animal he had defeated. After admiring it, he cut open the deer's belly, removed the organs, and cut a tender piece of loin meat. As it was getting dark, and there were no wild beasts in the area, he felt safe leaving the deer there to return for it the next day. Back at camp, it was completely dark. He started making dinner, slicing a pumpkin he had prepared earlier, adding the deer meat, and sprinkling some seasoning. He then added water and cooked it over the fire. After a while, dinner was ready. Lifting the lid, a delicious aroma spread, whetting his appetite. Steven eagerly tasted it. The deer meat was tender, the pumpkin sweet, and together, they enhanced each other's flavors. He thoroughly enjoyed his meal. The next day, he would return home with his prey, very satisfied with the hunt.